Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Alhamdulillah, we'll be studying a new book, Islam and Politics by Mufti Taqi Usmani. Especially in the current climate, with the issue of the Palestinian issue, a lot of Muslim has in Australia become very politically active and aware. And whether it be in council, local government, or in state government or national government that are coming up, elections and things, there are organizations set up, some older, some newer, to engage with the political process. The book might not be fully applicable because it's written by an alim, a mufti in a Muslim country. But the fiqh of it is very, very important for Muslim to understand. So we don't operate in that field ignorantly. That applies to ulama and non-ulama. So it's better that we make sure that we know the limits when it comes to politics. So I'll start the book. The introductions here in the book itself. The first is a preface, which I'll read, of the author himself, who's our teacher's teacher. Mufti Taqi Usmani needs no, Allah give him good health, and is still active till now, mashallah, despite his old age, mashallah. So he says, in the name of Allah, the most merciful and compassionate, I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, alone and without partner, and that Muhammad is his servant and messenger. I invoke the blessings of Allah and peace upon his final messenger Muhammad and his family and companions, along with all those who follow them in goodness till the day of rising. As a complete and comprehensive religion, Islam provides its followers with guidance in all aspects of life, politics and governance. Politics and governance are no exception. And yet there are often thought to be areas which Islamic teachings do not cover. With a view of dispelling this misconception and to elucidate the correct Islamic perspective on politics and related issues, a series of lectures in Urdu was delivered in Darul Uloom Karachi over a 2-week period in 1995. These lectures were then transcribed and edited before being published under the title Islam or Siyasi Nazariyat, Islam and Political Theories. By the grace of Allah and mercy of Allah, this publication proved very beneficial for Urdu-speaking readers, and it was subsequently translated into Arabic. It was then thought appropriate to translate the second half of the book, which focused on politics from an Islamic perspective for the benefit of the English-speaking readers. The result is the book which is now that you're reading. So then he explains about the various ulama that helped transcribe it and write it and translate it. Now there's the Prince Ghazi. He's from Jordan. He's from the royal family there. So he did a foreword to the book. He's an alim, mashallah. He's not just a prince, but just happens to be a prince also. So he's aware of politics. I guess you would have to be. So in the name of Allah, the compassionate, the merciful, praise be to Allah. Peace and blessings be upon the Messenger of Allah. Dear reader, peace be upon you. Assalamu alaikum. Since you have picked up this book, it is likely that you had the same frustrating experience as I have. I was searching for a book like this for years before it was actually written. What I mean is that I was looking for a book that would comprehensively and objectively explain from the viewpoint of traditional usul-based Sunni Islam, that is representing the 4 madhabs of Sunni Islam, the proper relationship between Islam and politics, taking into consideration the art of the reasonably possible in the admittedly and uniquely challenging present times, al-waqi'. The book you have between your hands, before you, right now, Islam and Politics, Islamic Political Principles and their Practical Implementation by Allama Mufti Taqi Usmani, represents the end of my and perhaps your intellectual quest for the proper nexus between Islam and politics. Let me explain further. There are a lot of books about Sunni Islam and politics in Arabic and even in English. They usually fall into the following categories or combination of permutations thereof. Number 1, academic books looking at a historical sweep of the differential political views expressed by Muslims or claimed by Muslims as being Islam's view. Number 2, Muslim Brotherhood books theorizing on Islam and politics or calling or arguing for one of the other political views with a whole gamut of opinions from Sayyid Qutb and Sayyid Sabiq to Rashid Ghanouchi, etc. Number 3, Wahhabi and Salafi jihadi books, treaties and call to action from Ibn Taymiyyah and Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab themselves to modern day writers like Abu Musab al-Suri, Call for Global Jihad, Abu Muhammad al-Maqdisi, Millat Ibrahim, the tracks of Osama bin Laden and those of ISIS and Nusra. These are softer. There are softer Saudi Salafi texts which are less overtly pro-jihad and of aggression. Number 4, modernist, pro-liberal, pro-Western, pro-democracy tracks and books gymnastically trying to make Islam fit into the modern world, modern Western political thought in various forms. Number 5, nationalistic tracts conflating contemporary Muslim causes with Islam itself and using Islam's sacred texts as a platform for their views. Number 6, apologists, pro-government texts trying to use Islam to justify or prop up X or Y modern Muslim nation state with a justification from the Quran and Hadith. Number 7, classical usuli Islamic texts about politics. For example, Mawardi's Ahkam Sultaniya. Most of these, of course, are perfectly correct and legitimate, but naturally none of them take into consideration the vast discrepancies in not only the political and historical circumstances between now and then, but more importantly, the technological changes which have all but affected the human condition itself. Indeed, these changes in particular make it necessary to constantly reassess the political and sociological context within which we must apply our immutable Islamic beliefs. None of these categories of books are sufficient in themselves for those who want to know how to apply usuli Sunni Islamic political principles to the situation as it is today. This may seem like a strange thing to say about the last category, because after all, the principles of Islam are immutable and applicable in every circumstance, time, place, and people, but in fact, these principles themselves require knowledge and understanding of circumstances, time and place, and people in order to be applied justly. This is why Mufti Taqi's book is so important. It is characterized by the following qualities. Number 1, it brings and summarizes the vast majority, if not all, of the key texts of the Quran and Hadith and the Sunnah mentioned about politics. Indeed, Mufti Taqi's knowledge is vast. His mind and discernment is peerless in our day, if I may say so, and this is clearly seen in the text. Number 2, it summarizes the usuli tradition and experience of politics, particularly benefiting from the 700 years of the Ottoman Hanafi experience with politics. The Ottoman Caliphate was the longest single Islamic experience with politics, and was one in which circumstances were constantly changing, in which there were constant jihad, in which there were many different well-respected and protected non-Muslim minorities living within the Muslim polity. At the same time, this book does not neglect divergent opinions from the Jumhur ulama, that is the other 3 madhabs, especially when these provide better practices. It is, number 3, it is objective, without secret, personal or political agenda, or vested interest, and without unguided passion, hawa. 4, it does not compromise Islam or the Sharia, and indeed contains a lot of inconvenient truths for today's states and rulers. On the other hand, it is realistic and does not seek to impose unnecessary burdens on people out of misplaced religious zeal. 5, it clearly benefits Mufti Taqi having tried to immerse himself in history and political thought, and in particular Western history and political thought. It is very rare to find an Islamic scholar Mufti Taqi's caliber doing this. But without this kind of study, it is impossible to fully understand the context of the present political reality. It benefits from Mufti Taqi's own efforts and experience with Islamic courts in Pakistan, and with Pakistani constitutional change, in which he was consulted but not fully listened to. It is clearly and simply written, and in English translation is well edited by Muhammad Isa Wali. For all those reasons and more, in my opinion, this book is the best book to appear in the modern world on Islam and politics that I know of, certainly in English, and I humbly recommend it to all those interested. I do not say that these things lightly, and Allah knows best. Professor Prince Ghazi bin Muhammad, 2017. So it's a recent English work. So introduction. This book is based on the latter part of a series of lectures delivered in Pakistan in Urdu, having examined the political theories and systems prevalent in various parts of the world. This writer proceeds to look into the guidance of Islam has given with regard to politics. This forms the subject matter of the present book in English, incorporating footnotes and a glossary which is divided into 6 chapters. Chapter 1 discusses the mutual relation between Islam and politics. We will inshallah examine in the light of the Holy Quran and the Sunnah the role of politics and political activities in Islam, and the nature of the Islamic injunctions bearing on the conduct of politics. Chapter 2 examines the basic Islamic concept of government and its objectives. In Chapter 3 we shall explain the guidelines as to how a government is to be formed. In Chapter 4 we shall see that what Islam has to say about running government and the rules and procedures to be followed. Chapter 5 will elucidate the Islamic injunctions about defense and foreign policy. Finally, in Chapter 6 we shall discuss questions relating to the removal of a government and the circumstances in which they may become permissible. The book is rounded off with 2 articles on political affairs with reference to Pakistan, previously published there in the monthly journal Al-Balagh. So in relation, the chapter 1, the relationship, I mean, we're going to read this over a few weeks. So chapter 1, the relationship between Islam and politics, the place of politics in Islam. The first thing to be said in that nowadays views about the relationship between Islam and politics on the subject are polarized between two extreme positions. One is that of secularism, according to which Islam is like a religion in general, a personal matter concerning only the individual and no one else, and that the politics and the governments have nothing to do with it. As we saw in the first chapter of the work, this kind of thinking was adopted as a reaction to the evils of the Christian form of theocracy. So we have to understand that a lot of the opposition to religion or political religion in the West is not against Islam. That's because they had theocracy. They had a Christian, Christian theocracy. So they turned away against that. So they assumed that Islam is the same. Once secular democracy became popular in many parts of the world, this kind of thinking also found acceptance. It was further strengthened by the activities of some religious circles, who instead of concentrating on the reform of their own character and deeds and engaging in acts of worship and the like, became the focal point of criticism when they began to engage in political activities as well. It raised many an eyebrow that a religious person should participate in politics. This viewpoint stemmed from comparing Islam with other religions, although such an analogy is absolutely wrong. The teachings of Islam are not limited to beliefs, worship and moral concerns. It is in fact provided us with invaluable injunctions regarding financial questions as well as matters of politics and government. Without these guidances and principles, the holistic concept of Islam would be incomplete. Some aspects of the injunction in question will be discussed below, inshallah. The second extreme view is that those who made every effort to refute secularism and as a result declared politics to be the actual object of Islam. According to them, the purpose of Islam is to establish a just political system all over the world, and all the other injunctions of Islam are meant to serve this end. Hence, a person who engaged in politics so that Islam may prevail in serving the true purpose of Islam, and those who engage in other things like purification, tazkiyah of the nafs, da'wah, preaching, reformation of society, islah of society, are not involved in politics, are myopic and oblivious to the actual purpose of Islam. So the other one made the whole goal of Islam politics. One tried to remove politics from Islam totally, and the other made it the whole of Islam just politics. And anybody that did any other work of deen were criticized and being neglectful. Both of these views are extreme, and they stem from an incorrect perception of the role politics play in Islam. In reality, the teachings and injunctions of Islam relate to every aspect of life, including politics. But it is wrong to say that politics is the actual purpose of Islam, and that all injunctions and teachings are meant only to serve this purpose. This can be illustrated through an example. Islam has laid down very detailed guidelines and instructions about trade, and it would be absolutely wrong to say that trade is the actual purpose of Islam. Right? Like he gave another analogy from another part of Islam. We talk about business dealings, transactions, very detailed. Kitab al-Buyu' is one of the most detailed sections and difficult section to study, but doesn't mean that the whole of Islam, we spend a lot of time studying it, but that doesn't mean the whole of Islam is about trading, right? Even though it is a part of Islam, there's rules for it. Similarly, Islam has laid down many guidelines concerning marriage, but the mere fact that there are many detailed guidelines does not mean that marriage is the actual purpose of Islam. So the fact that Islam has laid down basic guidelines and injunctions about politics does not mean that politics is the actual purpose of Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has clearly stated that the purpose of his having created man in the following ayah, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. And I have not created the jinn and man except that they may worship or serve me. Worship, or in Arabic ibadah, means being completely at the service of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This in turn includes all forms of worship sanctioned by the Sharia, as well as obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in every aspect of life. The word ibadah is related to the word abd, meaning slave. A slave obeys his master in every matter, but he does not worship him. So a slave's servitude to his master cannot be called ibadah. The relationship between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his servant, however, calls for obedience as well as worship, and hence it can be called ibadah. Ibadah itself is of two kinds. One type that is done for no other purpose but worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, such as prayer, fasting, zakat, hajj, sacrifice, and so on. All these are direct forms of worship. The second kind of ibadah comprise actions that include an aspect of worldly benefit, but which, if done in accordance with the divine injunction and in order to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, can become an indirect form of worship. Take trade, for example. If it is done in accordance with the divine commandment and with the intention of pleasing Allah, it becomes worship in a certain sense, and one is entitled to reward for it. But this is an indirect form of worship, because trade is not in itself an act of worship. Only through obedience and good intention can it become one. The same applies for politics and government. If carried out in obedience of Allah and in order to please Him, they become a form of worship, an indirect form of worship, because in themselves they are not acts of worship. However, just as is in the case of trade, obedience to Allah and good intention converts them into worship. Hence, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has stated that He has created mankind to worship Him, this covers both forms of worship. These two forms of worship together forms the objective, the purpose of man's creation. Now, obviously, the direct form of worship are of higher standing than the indirect ones. There are many forms of indirect worship, and one cannot say that man has been created for only one of them. Rather, all direct and indirect forms of worship put together are the purpose for which the man has been created. However, it should be kept in mind that the indirect forms of worship also have varying significance. The more far-reaching the effects that any of them has, the more important it is. As far as politics is concerned, once a proper Islamic government is established according to the principles of the whole of Sharia, not only does it become easier to perform indirect forms of worship, but also their circle is of practical application expand. In this sense, it is not wrong to point out that importance of political activity, but it would be wrong to declare that it is the sole purpose of religion or deen, for that would upset the whole list of priorities. To accept that the purpose of Islam is to govern would lead to a whole series of ills. The first of these ills is that if one declared politics to be the actual purpose, everything else would assume a secondary role. Actions which are direct forms of worship will no longer remain in the actual purpose. They would be reduced to being a means to achieve the actual purpose. Like salat will become for politics. All right? Like if you make politics as the whole point of deen, as is one view has, then you'll make all the other ibadahs subsidiary to that, and then they will also be for the main purpose. And so the importance will be diminished. In fact, however, the Holy Quran tells us that political powers are a means, while direct forms of worship are the actual purpose. And we'll continue, inshallah, next week. I have to head off. Jazakumullah khairah. We started Islam and politics.